Hello again, and welcome back to Pirated Radio. It's been a very long time. I am sorry about that. Um, I don't know what to say. I just couldn't find anyone to interview, to be honest. And I've been busy. I've just been doing stuff. In this episode, I speak to a gentleman called Scott Parker, not the Fulham manager, ex-Fulham manager. I don't know. Who was the creative director for Ministry of Sound for 9 years, and we discuss all his first influences. We talk about his education, when he got into Ministry of Sound, his work in the music business, obviously, and everything in that realm that you can imagine. So yeah, I hope you're well. I hope you're good, you're healthy, and that you enjoy. So, first of all, for the people listening that don't know yourself, could you give them a bit of a rundown of who you are and what you do?
I'm Scott Parker. I'm a graphic designer by profession. That's what I trained in, and that's what I did many moons ago. I'm probably, if I'm known at all, I'll be known for the work I did at Ministry of Sound for about 10 years, close to 10 years. But of course, I've done other things too, before and after, that might well be worth talking about. Yeah, I was there in the 90s designing like crazy, non-stop. And it was a fantastic period to be, I think, personally. Maybe I'm biased. But I think it was a great time to be of the age I was doing the job that I was doing in the place that I was doing it. It was, yeah. Studied at Kingston, did a HND. I don't think they exist anymore and haven't existed for quite some time. Higher National Diploma, didn't go for the degree route, but that was just again the way the education route was for me, and it served me well. And then after Ministry of Sound, I went on to run a small business with my wife. Again, we can go into further detail if you want.
You touched on your education a bit. Do you have any memories from when you were at university that really began to set the foundations for your own career?
Well, you're talking, I studied first at Gloucester, Gloucester College of Arts and Technology, GLOSCAT, and I did my OND, which is an ordinary national diploma, as it was back then. So I didn't do any A levels. I went straight from O level. I'm aging myself here because they don't exist either.
I vaguely know what you're talking about.
GCSEs now, of course, but anyway, my education route was fairly traditional, I suppose. Graphic design course, and then through to a HND. But as far as sort of, we're talking about 30 years ago. So, I graduated, I think it was 91, from Kingston. I mean, the whole thing was influential, of course, because I didn't come from a creative background. I didn't have that kind of a family. We weren't, a family of designers or anything. I mean, graphic design wasn't even a trade that I'd heard of, let alone something that I was going to end up doing, as a kid. So I think the whole experience was fantastic. And also being a student, late 80s, early 90s, there was the rave scene, was fresh. It was happening at that time. It was, and I suppose like people talk about punk or talk about the hippie period, is when you're that age and you're in that moment, sometimes it didn't pass me by at all. I was doing stuff, but you don't realize what it is at the time at all. And quite often, 5-10 years down the line, when you talk to people about it, you're like, oh, no, I didn't go there, or I didn't, people said, oh, you lived in the Forest of Dean, you must have gone to Castle Morton. I went, no, I didn't go to that. But still, the whole culture that was happening at the time, there was a real explosion of just music and art and design. So it was exciting. But as far as the actual design aspect, I think one of the things I do remember from Kingston is we went to a series of talks in London, and it was the Icongrada seminars. I don't even know if they exist anymore, but the three speakers, and I was thinking about this the other day, the three speakers that were there were Abram Games, So this is one for anybody listening to try to look into. Alan Fletcher and Saul Bass. None of those guys are now alive. I think it could have been. I know it was probably Saul Bass and Abram Games' last appearance, last public sort of talk of any kind. And I would have been 19, 20, maybe somewhere around that age. And even though then you can be a little bit flippant or just not very aware of how privileged you are to be seeing and hearing these things, because you're a little bit self-obsessed. You can be a little bit too into your own little world. I still remember at the times, particularly Saul Bass, making quite an impression. He was not only physically he was very Hollywood. He was there he had his big glass. He was smoking a cigar on the stage. He was talking about Alfred Hitchcock. And I think we all for a minute just stepped out of our own bubbles and were like, bloody hell, that's him. It's him there, and he talked through things like directing the shower sequence in Psycho. The posters, he went through all the poster design and everything, and that was phenomenal. And then, of course, you've got Abram Games, who was the designer of the majority of the marketing materials, or whatever you want to call it, propaganda, even from 2 world wars. He was the designer of Your Country Needs You, and things of that nature. And it was all hand painted. And the one thing that struck me about Saul Bass, Abram Games, and Alan Fletcher, who was founder of Pentagram, is the majority of the work that they were well known for was hand done. It was all just drawn, sketched, painted. They were very artistic guys. I mean, they were designers, but they weren't what you would call a designer by today's standards. They were very different. They were the sort of, in a way, the first generation of graphic designers. So they had a big influence. I've got a few more, thinking about it now. There was a couple of guys called the Thunder Jockeys, and I don't think anybody would even know or remember who they are, but they were these 2 guys that worked in-house at an advertising agency in London, and they produced some of the most anarchic, chaotic, weird, just really, really mad stuff of the sort of late 80s, early 90s. They did some record covers for a band called Living Colour, who were a sort of funk, sort of around the time when the Red Hot Chili Peppers were kicking off. And but the design was, even now when you look at it, it's kind of like, what the heck, it was real, sort of just all over the place, and everything they did was like that. And I thought that was really refreshing. I loved their stuff. I think I tried to copy them, but I think it had a bit of an influence on me as a student. And then there was things like the Face magazine, Neville Brody's work. In fact, Neville Brody came to my final show at Kingston, which was great. And he came up and had a little chat and pointed at a couple of things on the wall. Said, "That's cool. That's good. You should probably do more of that stuff. That's not so good. You probably wouldn't, do that more." And I was like, "Yeah, okay." And he was right, So yeah. I mean, the more you think about it, I mean, I think it was just being around all those kinds of people. My college years, I call it college, not university, were, I think the first Apple Mac was released. I mean, when I was at Richmond or Kingston, there was a hot metal department downstairs, wood typesetting, metal typesetting, and there were the guys in white lab coats. They were all close to retirement, and they'd grown through the industry of hand typesetting and the whole thing. And they were, I think before I finished, they were made redundant because they brought in the Apple Macs into the school, and they put them on, and they were so slow, and everybody was fighting to get on them. But gradually, people lost interest in going down to their little room, and But even now, I think having that, just clipping the edge of that time, having that available was fantastic. We were really sort of my whole generation, I suppose, were on that edge of the end of one period of design. Like I say, Alan Fletcher, Saul Bass, all these guys, these old school guys that were phenomenal. And then the birth of the Mac, and that influence. So I suppose it was a bit of both, a bit of both those worlds, the craft, the original craft of design, and the new technology that was coming in. At the same time, there was all this explosion with rave culture and partying, and so it was good fun.
I think a lot of the best work, just in the whole creative spectrum, comes from when you merge two things like that. Anyway, so I think it makes sense, that a lot of the nicest work comes from that. Your Peter Savills, your Malcolm Garrett, people that are 8VO. I really like.
Oh, okay, yeah.
They were of the same time period, aren't they? So they've probably got the same influences.
Yeah, you wouldn't. I mean, it's crazy to think now that when you see the work of the likes of 8VO, which I wasn't particularly, it wasn't my thing, but the guy that I was really hanging out with, shared a house with when I was a student, he was, it was 8VO all the way. I think that, again, that was coming in, and it was astonishing to think that very little, if any of it, was ever done on a computer.
Mm.
In fact, I think that, they did the series of magazines, didn't they, Octavo, and they're very collectible now. And I was impressed. I liked them, but I was veering more towards this sort of hand-drawn, illustrative, sort of almost not punky, but I was reluctant to be a typographer, which is funny, really, because I suppose I became a little bit more of that further down the line. I found a lot of typography quite boring as a student. I think I knew that you had to learn it, but it was so technical back then, pre-Mac. It was so mathematical, so scientific, and all the things that I was trying to, in effect, leave behind, I suppose, from my school days. I wanted to create stuff and be a designer. Or an artist of some kind. Not a fine artist at least, but just something creative. And every time we had to sit down with our typesetting stuff and try to work out what the heck it was all on about, I didn't zone out, but I was like, oh, I'm not sure about this. I don't know if I feel this. But so really, I wouldn't sort of say it's my main thing even today. I enjoy it, but I'm not. Half the time I can't recognize a typeface anymore. I mean, people go, "Oh, that's so and so," and they get really obsessed with what it's called, and I rarely did. Handful of type fonts that I would recognize off the top of my head, or a bunch of really crazy, silly ones. The usual ones you joke about when you're a student. Shatter, Pump Tryline, and all those kind of crazy stuff. Cooper Black.
So at this time, I read on your Instagram that you called yourself Square Peg briefly at this point. I'd understand that would come from the music, I'd assume.
No, I think I just came up with it when I was a student for a project once. And I started to design some T-shirts around the same time. They weren't for a project at college at all. It was for a band called EMF. I don't know if anybody, again, it's a long time ago, but they did a track called Unbelievable, which was a huge number one across the world, I think, all over the place. And they were friends. We used to hang out and go to parties and go to the gigs. And they'd only just got signed to EMI. And so I was had a go at designing T-shirts for them. And the band loved them. But the management wanted to go their own way and this, that, and the other. So I took them to a place in Camden Market, a store, some of the drawings I'd done, thinking, well, I think there's something here. And so did they think they liked them. And that's how the T-shirt thing sort of started. So I was calling myself Square Peg as a student because I thought it was quite funny, because I think that it came about because of the phrase square peg in a round hole. And I like the fact that you don't have to conform or do things in the usual way to get along. You don't have to do what previous generations had done. It was the rave culture thing at the time. We were, I was, like I said, I wasn't too into the typographic old school way of doing things. I wanted to get out there, I was living in London for the first time, and it was very exciting. So the idea of doing things the way you wanted to do it, I think that's where it came from. Plus, Square Peg, the initials SP are the same as mine. So But it was very short-lived. I didn't hang on to it as a moniker or anything like that. It was a few T-shirts, and then I sort of dropped it, and that was that.
It's fashion, because obviously you'd go on to run the business with your, did you say your wife, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is fashion something you've always had an interest in?
Not particularly. No.
Yeah.
I mean, no more than your sort of every other perhaps design student would, as in I enjoy the aesthetics. I like to, dress okay, but I'm certainly not obsessed with fashion, never have been. No, I think the T-shirts came about because, like I said, it was to do with a band who were a bunch of friends and I was hanging out with, and I started trying to come up with some designs for them, and that was exciting. And T-shirt design back then was pretty big. I mean, people with massive prints. It was full either back prints, front prints. There was a lot of big, well, not big brands, but there were a lot of T-shirt designs that were selling tons back then. They went out of favor eventually. I mean, there was definitely a lull where nobody wanted to have graphics on things, but it seems to be coming back. I've seen an awful lot of really very, very similar, familiar designs coming out in that world again, which is fun. But no, fashion was never an industry I sort of sought.
So yeah, this is jumping forward from there, and then we'll jump backward eventually. But you, from what I understand, you briefly lectured at Manchester Met.
Again, I think it was I can't even remember the exact time. It probably was something to do with when I was at Ministry of Sound, and they asked if I would go up. I think I set a brief. That was it. They asked me to set a brief. So no, I wasn't a visiting lecturer as such. I set a brief to the students. I judged it. I went up, did a couple of visits there. And so really, I suppose that was the extent of that. But I certainly visited plenty of universities, during those days. Would pop in and do the odd talk. Yeah.
On kind of the back of that, and I'll scrap the lecturer stuff. But when you've obviously looked at graduate works, portfolios, things like that. Is there anything specifically you look for when you've been looking at graduate work?
Well, in the work itself, or
the person, the work, anything really.
What would I look for if I was seeing a student? I mean, yes, I have seen hundreds over the years, and the ones that always left a lasting impression. Yes, the work was strong. There would be an immediate reaction from me if I saw the first page, 2 pages. I would normally know within the first couple of pages of a portfolio. And when I say pages, I'm talking old school traditional portfolios. Obviously now it'll all be digital, but back then, I would know pretty quick. But if the person didn't connect, I would start to lose faith quite quickly within a few minutes. If the person lacked honesty, if I felt they were, you can sort of tell when somebody's lying in an interview. And I don't mean about whether or not, it's just that sort of false confidence that starts to come across. I suppose you could call it cocky. And that's maybe harsh, but I always just liked if there was an honest conversation going on between yourself and them, because at the end of the day, you've got to work quite closely with them. And I only ever worked in small teams. It was we were all in the same room as each other, so you had to get along. So interviews could be, more about just getting to know that person as well as the work. So that they have to be quite a clear communicator as well. I mean, there was often, and I always allow a little bit for nerves and shyness, of course, because again, a lot of graduates especially can be very nervous. It's a very incredibly nerve-wracking experience. But as long as they can get through an interview, and yes, they might be sweating and they might stumble occasionally, that's all fine. If they, it's quite endearing. It's just as long as they can communicate, and I know that it's not going to be awkward. So, but that only really comes with practice, sort of just once you get out there and have interviews, you just got to just keep on taking the interviews, even if you're not 100% sure if you even want the job you're going for. Yeah. It's quite good just to get out there and see people.
I think when I've asked other people on the podcast that sort of thing, it always does come back to the person. So you could have a lot, like the best portfolio in the world, but unless you're sort of a nice person to begin with, everything kind of just goes out the window from there on in.
Yeah. I think, you're looking for the perfect combination of both. And it's when you work in a fairly niche business and in a brand as I did at Ministry of Sound, you're looking for something quite specific. And we would get a lot of CVs. I mean, hundreds and hundreds every time we put an ad out. And it would be a long process and it would be tricky, it would be tricky.
Okay, jump forward a little bit. So you'd obviously graduated in the late 90s, early 2000s, something like that.
When I graduated? No, I graduated in 91.
That's the one. So you graduated and then you worked for a company called
Green Ink was my first full-time job.
Oh yeah.
Actually, I think it was. And that was through EMF. That was because EMF had just put out their first couple of records, and I found out from them who did the design work. So it was nothing to do. I mean, in effect, and that was how I got my first job. And I think that's the thing about being a student, depending on where you study, of course, is to just try to get out there and sort of network without being a pain in the ass. I just was lucky that I had some friends in a band that band hit, kicked off, found out who did the design work. I gave them a call. They said, oh yeah, I name dropped, said, my friends are in this band. Can I come see you? I went to see them. They just happened to like my work. And I ended up getting a job. And from there, that was it. I was in the music industry. I mean, I never planned to be in the music industry. It was not some master plan like, oh, I must work in the music industry. That's the way it went. And I worked there for about a year or so. And it was what you call lick and stick. I mean, they had Macs, but everything was output to film bromide from the Macs in the studio. And it was manually artworked with CS10 board and, boards and spray mount. And we were using spray mount so liberally, and it was in a basement with zero ventilation. So not the healthiest of things. And smoking, everybody would smoke, and, it was like that, But they used to do a lot of work for like bands like Iron Maiden and stuff like that. But they were getting a lot of like rave covers to do from FFRR and a lot of the dance labels that were flinging up left, right, and centre. So I would get a lot of those jobs to do. I worked on some really early sort of rave sleeves. There was like Rhubarb and Custard was one, which was literally a sample of the cartoon Rhubarb and Custard, which was really annoying, but it was like in the charts, got in the charts. And so I would get a lot of that stuff to do, and I would just draw the sleeves and then try to work it on the Mac. But I was still learning the Mac back then, and they were really good. I mean, they had people there that were like just obsessed with it, and I was like, I'd have a go and think, okay, I think that's right. And you would spend hours and hours on the Mac just trying to typeset something, thinking I'm fiddling around with it, when actually I was just drawing sketches all the time for these rave sleeves, and I was doing the T-shirts on the side. Then after that, I went to Intro.
Yeah. Do you want to discuss your time at Intro at all?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, there's plenty to go through. I mean, between Green Ink and Intro, I left Green Ink because I felt it wasn't quite the company for me. That was one of the only times I left a job without really knowing what job I was going to go to. I just didn't feel right to stay there anymore. Just something about it. It felt like I'd done nearly a year. It was fine. I didn't quite like the vibe of the studio. It was a bit strange for me. And I knew a few other people that had left there, felt the same. But it was a good place to start and really get to grips. And then so I freelanced for a bit. I worked freelance for Blue Source, who some people may well have heard of. I'm not sure they're still going, but they were just beginning at the time, and they became massive. And they were fun to work with. Got to know those guys a little bit. And then I saw a job ad for Intro, and I applied for that, and then got a job there. And I was there for about 3 years, but it was formative because they were real sort of, they knew design. I mean, it was like, it was one of the only places I've ever worked and ever probably will, where you felt like you were getting an education as well as you were doing a job. It was really full on, and they were great. I mean, it was a great studio, great atmosphere. It was intimidating at times because the people I was working with were that good, and I was just a junior. Kind of still very green, still very a bit not sure. Making mistakes here and there. Not all the design. I always felt like a lot of my work was like I didn't really hit my stride until at least 5 years after leaving college. My first 5 or 6 years after leaving college, a lot of the work is like, oh my god, and I might put it on Instagram occasionally just for a bit of a laugh, because I think, oh god, but there's some things I wouldn't want to. So I know there are a lot of people that come out, just hit the ground running, and they just seem to be these. No, I felt like I was still studying and still finding my feet for several years after leaving, and it probably wasn't until the first year or two at Ministry of Sound where I felt things started to click. But intro was, I worked with some great designers, Julian House, Adrian Talbot, Matt Cook, actually no longer Matt Cook now, and yeah. But anyway, those guys, I think Julian House is still there and Adrian Talbot's still there, just fantastic. And they were doing things like primal screen covers and a lot of stuff that is very influential.
I should look into them more. It sounds like one of the nice ones to look into if they were doing stuff for Primal Scream and stuff.
Oh, Intro. I mean, they're still going. So they must have been going for nearly 30 years now, which is crazy, actually. Because I think when I joined them, they've been going for 3 or 4, maybe a few more years than that. The early 90s when they probably set up, something like that. And they were just one of those agencies when you're in London as a sort of young designer, you're like, oh, they're cool. I want to, because I would just go into shops and look at the back of sleeves and think, you just go and look at the back of sleeves, see who designed it, and go, oh, I wouldn't mind working with them, So it was, Faro, Designers Republic, Styler Rouge. I went to see them a couple of times. There was, Intro, Main Artery was one. Tons of these places, and they were like, little agencies, 5 to 10 people maybe, dotted about the place, and doing work for all the record labels. And back in when it probably paid quite well to do work for record labels, and so they were doing an awful lot of work for the likes of like Primal Scream. Simply Red was a massive one when I was there. Did some great reggae sleeves. They did some stuff with Factory Records after it closed and then sort of reopened. So so I don't know if that's enough on intro for you or not, but had a lot of fun. Really learned a lot about how to conduct yourself as a designer, not just the work, but how to conduct yourself and how an agency could be. The one thing I took from intro, which I think I've sort of emulated a little bit when I was at Ministry of Sound, was the way that and it was Adrian Shaughnessy at the time who was running it. He's not there anymore, but he was sort of the creative lead as such, and he pulled together the groups of designers, and it was his and another person's agency to start with, and there was no two designers were exactly the same. So some agencies might go for a real house style, and you know, if you go to work for that company, they are looking for that in the portfolio, and they don't particularly want to have some out there different type of designer from what they want. Whereas at intro, it wasn't quite like that. My design wasn't the same as Julian's or Matt's or Adrian's or whatever. They could kind of come together on projects and maybe melt together with the way their designs, but they often worked independently. They would be given a project, and that project, the client would come in and go, and then Adrian would think, well, I think that's probably more that designer's style. It was like a collective, even though it wasn't, of individual designers rather than a studio of a sort of style, if you get what I mean. So I thought that was interesting. I thought it sort of made you look outside of your own bubble again. It made you think, oh, okay, that's interesting what they're doing. I hadn't thought of it like that. So that was interesting. I like that process.
I will jump back to that when I get to the Ministry of Sound stuff. But I have an on-running theme, not a theme. I have an on-running segment. It's kind of the only segment I've got two. The kind of the ending I do all the same, and then this bit in the middle I've begun to do the same. But it's essentially I've got the idea of a Hall of Fame, and everybody that comes in, I ask them to bring something, not specifically bring like actually bring it, but bring something that if they had to pick one thing from their whole career, which they think was something that was really seminal in their whole career. So it could be a book, a person, work of art, piece of music, documentary, movie, whatever you want it to be. If there was just one thing you had to pick, what do you think that would be? And I know that's a very big question.
It
Um,
certainly is. I'm never very, well, I think about these things, and I think for me, it's not a possession, a thing, or an object. It was more a sort of not maybe it was a process. I don't know if this counts for what you're looking for, but for me, the idea, and I remember a meeting at Ministry of Sound once with Palumbo, who was the owner, James Palumbo, and he rarely met with me. He was intimidating to a lot of the people there. It was like he was kind of friendly, but also you wouldn't want to be. It was an odd dynamic, a company like that, to have somebody like that in charge. So if you were to have a meeting with him, you would always be a bit, oh Christ, what's this about? So I went up to his office. It felt like like you were going to see a Bond villain or something like that. But he was very charming, and he said to me, "What is the most valuable moment of your day, or the most valuable part of what you do to you?" That was one of the questions he was asking me. And I just came off the top of my head and I said, I think that when I'm not thinking about design, when I'm not, because at that moment, that period in time, it was non-stop. It was eat, sleep, drink, go to bed thinking about it, wake up thinking about it. But actually, I said to him, I said, when I switch off, when I'm out, when I'm just having fun, and for those moments when I don't think about it, shortly afterwards, that's when the best ideas happen. So for me, I think that just trying to tear yourself away from, especially now with technology, the obsession of looking what everybody else is doing and seeing how you feel like, oh man, that's amazing what they're doing, and that the constant stream of sort of visual information, cutting yourself off from that or switching off from that, for me, still seems to be one of the most important things. So it's not a thing, of course. So don't know if that covers it.
I get what you mean. That's fine. That's completely fine. When I spoke to Hamish Amir from 8VO, I don't know if I might have just butchered his
Oh
name.
yeah, Amy. Yeah, I've heard
Yeah,
of
yeah,
him.
yeah.
Yeah.
But he mentioned that he's got the same sort of thing where it's sort of he just eats, it's a constant thing for him, and he called it a disease
Mm,
in the interview, which I quite liked. He just can't switch it
right.
off. He is constantly thinking
It
about
can be. It
design.
can
Yeah,
be.
yeah, and I completely get it. I'm the same. I'm obsessed with everything like that. So yeah, jumping forward to the crux of the interview, essentially, your Ministry of Sound days. Um,
Can't avoid it.
can you remember the first day you stepped in the offices there?
Yes, there's a little story about that one. I was working at Intro, and Mark Rodel, the marketing guy at Ministry of Sound, came to see Intro, and it was the first time they'd gone to outsource, or second time. I think they did Designers Republic, did a sleeve for Ministry of Sound. After that one, they came to Intro, and they briefed in the annual, so the first annual, and I was given that job. And it was, for me, the sort of first time whilst I was at Intro where I was given a prestigious job, in my opinion. Definitely, I mean, a lot of the best jobs always went to the more senior or the other designers, more experienced guys. So this, other than the fact I did an ABBA box set, I did an ABBA box set before that, but this Ministry of Sound job was the one. It's like, this was perfect for me. I was really excited. It was like, oh, this is fantastic, because Ministry of Sound had only done one comp before that. Cream were starting to put out theirs, with Faro, and they were phenomenal. And I was like, wow, okay, this is it. This is that opportunity. And so I just went hell for leather on the ideas. I remember the brief came in. I've not got to answer your question yet, but this is what happens when you speak to designers. I don't know, or speak to me. Um, the brief was Mark came in with a year's worth of Mixmag magazines with post-it notes in and said, that's pretty much the brief. I want to get all of that into a CD somehow. And we think we're going to call it the annual, maybe, names were buzzing around. So I come up with a few ideas, and the one that worked was the book with the sort of Smithson or Smithson, the diary, the sort of posh diary, with the leatherette and the foil block logo on it, and then inside was the booklet and all that kind of stuff. So that was the first annual, and I think then he rang me one day while I was at intro, said, "Hello, Scott," and I was like, "Hello," and he was a very confident guy. He was very much the that side of Ministry of Sound. You had James Palumbo was the sort of suit, the business guy, the hardcore sort of money guy, and then somebody like Mark, who was the marketing guy, the kind of cocksured sort of attitude. And he just rang me up and said, "Scott, do you want a job? Do you want to come work here?" Sort of thing. "Come on, come work here like this." And he was very persuasive. And to be honest, didn't need that much persuading. I was ready to move on. So I took the job. And then the first day when I went in to Ministry of Sound, they had two guys in house before me, and they were Tom and Tom, two Toms, and they called themselves Tom and Tom. And one of those Toms, unfortunately, had to move on because I came in. I didn't really know much about the politics and what was going on internally there at the time. I didn't realize, how things were dealt with or not. But I think that there was a little bit of a weird vibe, let's put it that way, when I first went into the office. I think because one or two people were fond of this designer. He was doing some work that they liked, and then they moved him on and they brought me in. So what I did on the first day is when I got in, and one of the Toms was still there, the one of the two of them was still there, and we got on well. He was nice, we still do. And I switched on the Mac that this ex Tom had, and it came up on the loading screen. And the first thing it did, like you get the screen on a Mac when it comes on. This is a really old Mac as well. And on the screen, it said underneath it, "Job Stealer." And it had these two eyes. These two, this guy, the thing is, his sense of humor is, and we get on well now. He's great, But at the time, I was like, oh my God. That was literally the first thing I saw on my first day. And I sort of sat there looking at this screen going side to side and going, Tom, to the one, I said, do you know what this is? Like this, and he was pissing himself laughing. And I found it funny. It was funny. But I was a little bit like, oh my God, what's going to happen when I bumped into this guy next time? Does he hate me? And I think he was obviously rightly a little bit peeved, but it wasn't with me. It was more with perhaps the way things were dealt with when he, was let go. So, as I say, he went on and did absolutely fine for himself. But at the time, I was like one of those things. I go, the thing is, I look back and I was thinking, that's it's just funny. The first thing on your first day to see Job Stealer on the screen. That's what I remember the most. There's tons of minutes. Ministry of Sound is just madness.
Yeah, I
It's
was going to
madness.
say, is the kind of an atmosphere of people just doing what I guess pranks in a sense? Was that a thing
There was a
then?
bit of that going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, pranks, it's more just behaviour. Just you've got an awful lot of egos, an awful lot of people at different ends of the spectrum of partying, let's say, at any time, at any given day of the week. There would be DJs coming and going. There are promoters who obviously live a nocturnal life during incredibly heady days. You know, so yeah, you had some real personality to deal with. If you were talking to somebody that had been on a 3-day bender and then they're trying to brief you on a flyer or something like that, you'd be like, or if you yourself, let's say, had had a few busy nights out and you were trying to deal with them as well, you can kind of imagine some of those conversations are could be a little bit tricky. But no, it was amazing. It was great fun. It was exciting. It was really, it's hard to know where to start.
Jumping forward a little bit, as you were working at Ministry of Sound, to jump backward, when you spoke about intro, you mentioned that there wasn't like a house style, so to speak, and Yeah, yeah. And then at Ministry of Sound, it felt like the projects. There was a lot of experimentation going on with the projects, and the stuff that on your Instagram, for example, there's definitely a style there that I think you cultivated. But on different CDs will look different from each other. It seems as if there's a lot of different ideas cultivating there, and there's a lot of freedom in the process. Would that be correct?
Oh, freedom for sure. Yeah, I mean, um, I think that, as I said earlier, my own sort of personal journey as being a designer was still really fresh. I was still, I think, still learning on the job. And with Ministry of Sound in particular, I was thrown in at the deep end. I was 25, I think, when I got the job there, started about that age. And most of the people there were probably around that age too. It was a young, and now I look back and think, gosh, that's astonishingly young for a company like that, but that's just the way it was. And uh, um, so I would say the first couple of years, 2 to 3 years I was there, I didn't really have a house style even of my own, let alone what I was going to do with Ministry of Sound. So it was only through a process of elimination, learning, feedback from them, and the people that I worked with, the fellow designers, that I eventually grew the team, where I started to sort of in my head go, right, that's working, that's not working. That's when you're in house as well at that sort of a company, and in effect, you've got about, even though you're working for one brand, at any point, I'd probably have about 15 or 20 different clients coming at me because they'd all be flyers, CDs, tours, merchandise, and they'd all be managed by these different people, even though they kind of have to go through a central system of approval. Quite often, they just walk into your office and go, "I don't want that. What are you doing that for?" And you'd be trying to explain to them, "Well, there's a release coming out in 6 months, and we've got to keep it in some form of continuity. Otherwise, it's I don't care about that. I want it to look like this, and banging on desks and all kinds of stuff quite often, and all that sort of like, oh god, and so you'd be seen as being a little bit, my job for the first 2 to 3 years was like wrangling these people who weren't used to this way of dealing with design or seeing design as something that could be good for the business as a whole, to bring together all these very disparate elements and try to add some cohesion to it whilst trying to give them what they wanted. It was like a lot of give and take, trying to give them that like individuality they wanted with their thing, whilst also thinking, I really need to bring this into some style. So I don't think it succeeded 100% ever. I mean, which is why it possibly does look the way it does. I think that by the time I really knew and had a good solid hold on things, something would start falling apart elsewhere. The business would change, staff would be made redundant, and new staff would come in. So it was like starting from scratch. Um, People would just change their minds about what they wanted the brand to be. You know, it was just all very, very chaotic. As you can imagine, but a good kind of chaos. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, well, I look back at the work. I was given so much freedom to make mistakes on the job. If I did a design and it wasn't great, people go, well, it's good, but then eventually it got better and better. And with the compilation series, it just seemed to be win after win, to be honest. I mean, and the thing is, we had things like the flyers and promotions to sort of experiment with. So if you felt like you had an idea, like the deck, the 1210 decks and the sound system, then one of the two of the best ideas I think we had where we took the sound system where we just look at just a stylus or a connector or some weird little geeky bit of the sound system, and we'd photograph it, macro lens it, and then build a sort of design about that. And then we ended up doing a lot of stuff with the Technics 1210s and stuff like that. So yeah, no, there was a lot of freedom to.
In terms of when you're trying to cultivate the house style, when I was looking at your work on Instagram, there seems to be a very typographic, almost Swiss style approach to everything. And you mentioned earlier that type wasn't something that you were extremely fond of. Is
Font, I mean, I respect it. You have to, as a designer, you have to give it the respect it's due, and you have to know at least some fundamentals, what's right, what's wrong, and all that. But I mean, I wasn't even really, you know, kerning was. learning, making sure that your letter spacing was really bang on was not something I was really particularly great at to start with either. It was only through realizing that I'd put something and I'd look at it and I'd go, ooh, that's not great. And then working harder at it the next time and then really nailing it. Plus working with, as I say, bringing in designers that I respected and that I thought were really good at their thing. I think that's where the intro thing comes in. Is I remember there was a point when there was myself, Tom, who'd been there before me, that Tom. He was still there. He was very much an art director. He was ideas. He wanted to do photo shoots. He was not, his design, he had a little bit of a lack of confidence. His typography was like, oh God, don't give me the type. I want to just come up with the ideas. But we worked together, and that really, he helped me with ideas and I'd help him with the structure of the design. So that again was stuff I got from intro. And so then I brought in other designers. There was a chap called Peter, who's a Swedish guy who phenomenal typographer. I learned a lot from him just about how you can elevate something so much just by paying a bit more attention to that type. But he was equally willing to sometimes go off the wall and do stuff that wasn't just like that. I think he came in with a very strict typographic kind of way of doing things, and after a while realized, oh, okay, and he would experiment more. So no, I would not say I'm I'm nowhere near like an 8BO type of designer. I'm not that knowledgeable. I'm not that skilled, and I'm not that obsessed more than anything with going down that path. But I love it. I respect it. And if I wanted to do something in that kind of vein, I probably could, and I enjoy it. And I think that's where, yeah, I think that's probably where I come from as a designer, is sort of a bit of a magpie kind of approach. It's kind of, I don't go down one road. I like to, quite often, if I'm given a job, I start thinking, okay, some nice type, bit of color. And I go, no, 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 no. I almost stop myself. I have to kind of go, don't just go down that road just because it works. Just remember what it was like when you did design the t-shirts, or, you know, do stuff that was just a bit bonkers, or not even that bonkers, just not the norm, just don't just go straight down the type route. But yeah, no, there was a period where we were doing some stuff that was very, very tight typographic, and I loved it. I was like, that was a period, it was like these different periods where you do stuff that was some stuff that we did very early on, which was quite illustrative, and then later and later it got much more minimal. And again, that was in response a lot of the time to what the feedback I was getting, and sort of where I felt the brand was going at the time. I mean, since I left, it's changed again massively.
What are your thoughts on, just as a side note? I don't know if you saw when Spin rebranded the Ministry of Sound logo. What were your thoughts on that at all? You're not a fan?
Yeah, I couldn't get. I respect Spin a lot. I think they're fantastic, and they're much more in that sort of design. Not nerds. That sounds wrong, but their design ethos is much more clinical, much more experiment. It's kind of out there thinking. I mean, mine was always very almost poppy, a bit more instant gut feeling stuff. There's very much like, you can imagine them sitting around and almost like brainstorming these very geeky things and getting really into what they could do with a typeface and experimenting. And mine wasn't quite like that. And so I was surprised and also I went through a design process with Ministry of Sound to redesign the logo. And I set a brief, and we were going to completely redesign the logo several years, 20 years before the Spin thing, during my time there in the 90s. And I wrote a brief and then I went to a load of agencies, like in some of the best logo designers in London. I'm not sure if Spin were one of them, actually. A couple turned it down, but I went to see a bunch of people, and we ended up doing it in house. And we ended up keeping the logo as is, but we did a massive job on refining it and updating it and taking it from. And there's case studies on my Instagram. Scott Parker, 1970 is my Instagram. There are some case study sort of snippets on there, if you look down, of that logo revamp. And in the text, it explains the process. And so we did that. So when I saw the spin thing, I I didn't get it. Or the only way I can say it is I didn't get it. I didn't get what the end design was about. I think that primarily they ended up using it for the bar offices they ended up setting up in London. That's not the club. But it did strike me, it reminded me massively of how Ministry of Sound as a business was to work for, where you would have in good intention, but a very short attention span, and that things would get done and ideas would be encouraged, but 3 months down the line, it might just get thrown out and forgotten. And that struck me a bit as a symptom of that there was this possible big push of like, we're going to change, we're going to refresh the business, it's going to be a massive job, we're going to do this thing, we're going to be brave, we're going to be bold, we're going to be Ministry of Sound. And then maybe there was some bad feedback, or maybe somebody stepped in and said, what the fuck, is this? And they got cold feet, or they just maybe changed tack a bit and went, not sure, we love it, guys. And I can imagine Spin, maybe they got frustrated with working under that process, because I think a lot of the designers that I met that worked with Ministry of Sound on the outside, like Designers Republic, and I've spoken to Ian about it, and he said they were just, I said, I can't understand how you could do it for 10 years. How could you work there for 10 years? It was chaos working for them as a client. And I said, well, it's very different. When I was in there, I had them there every single day, all day long. I could communicate, I could talk. We had these conversations. I enjoyed it. It was great. But yeah, I think if I was working with them as a client from the outside, it might be difficult. So, somebody from there may hear this. I don't know. I've never really spoken to him, but I haven't really seen that Spin logo anywhere since they said it was launching this new era. And all I know of is that it might have been applied here and there at a bar in London, in offices. I think that the logo is a bugger to work with. It's not like Cream, which was designed by Farrow, and then they designed most of the stuff to do with it. I didn't design the original logo. I had to work with it, and I had to work around it. And to have those kind of constraints was actually quite good. I mean, it made me really, really think hard about what can I do with this time and time and time again. And that was the challenge.
It's the type of thing where I'm not a massive fan of the Coca-Cola logo, but it's got so much heritage built into it. It's like you could not change the Coca-Cola logo.
I love the Coca-Cola
I
logo.
don't. I think it's crap. I do. I think it bugs me, but it's kind of.
In fact, I actually used that as inspiration for one of the design jobs I did whilst at Ministry of Sound. But anyway, yeah.
Jumping forward, and you touched on it, and I was thinking about it then. How you mentioned the sort of the clinical nature of Spin, and I was thinking about your stuff. Is it because I guess they're in sort of a silo, so to speak, and then you're sort of you're interacting with club nights and clubbers and things like that, so you get that very humanistic feel to it just from the get go. Yeah.
Whenever I went out socially, let's say in London back then, when all the good designers would congregate in certain bars, because that was certainly the way it was. And you go to certain bars because you just know you'd probably meet some people or that you'd be standing, oh, look, that's so-and-so from Farrow, or from they were probably the one company I always used to kind of look to because of Cream. But the problem is I never felt I could really, if conversation with other fellow designers got very about design, I'd kind of almost back off a bit, because I was a bit like intimidated still. I think, again, I've always felt that it's not imposter syndrome perhaps, but it's that I know I'm a designer. I've done a lot of design. I know that a lot of people like that design. But when I speak to other designers, a lot of the time it goes over my head. I'm like not that obsessed to the point of having to name check other designers. It's never been that interest. That's never, like I said about fonts and other things, it's not to me what it was about or what it's about.
Yeah, the question I actually had, I did kind of go on a tangent, but it was, did you ever find that the visuals you were creating ever helped to dictate the auditory direction of things, or vice versa?
No, I mean, it was always the A&R, the management, the record label people that would drive the sound. Sure, if we had, I mean, with compilations particularly, if we did a cover and an album that was a massive success, then they would do more. You know, it's like with Hollywood and movies. You know, if you do a few Marvel films, they'll keep doing more Marvel films. So definitely yes, but I don't think it inspired or influenced the nature of the music. No, it was always the other way around. The music would in although in saying that, sometimes, I mean, a lot of the time I didn't really even listen. I mean, I didn't need to hear the tunes to design. I knew it was dance music, and I knew that I would like some, but not others. And it wasn't. It wasn't about the. It sounds, but it wasn't about the music for me. It was about the design. It was about the brand, about the diversity within that brand, and the sort of opportunities that it had to give a designer. You know, I mean, it was like a fantastic opportunity.
Oh yeah, because you mentioned Cream, and obviously Cream were a competitor, as far as I understand. Was there sort of
Mm,
yeah, was there sort of a them versus us
yeah,
kind of mentality
yeah, it was
within?
like Oasis and Blur.
Yeah.
Yes and no. I mean, same as with Oasis and Blur. Actually, it was all happening that time. I mean, I remember going in when to HMV when Oasis and Blur had that big standoff about number ones, and they were both releasing an album on the same day, and it made the national news. It was big news, you know. I mean, they were built the rivalry, but actually, even though they did say a few things on various media channels, they're actually like, I think all got on quite well, and they do now. But similarly with Cream, you know, and Ministry of Sound, I think we would often put releases out and it'd be in the same week. And I'd go into the stores and I'd see the big banks of CDs side by side, and then they'd probably be like obsessing over the numbers, you know, the sales. I think Ministry of Sound more often than not came out on top. And I don't know if that was to do with the design or not, because I think Cream's design was often out of, you know, they knocked it out of the park nearly every time. But in a way, Ministry of Sound's ethos was a bit more commercial. It was always much more about taking that sort of a bit more mainstream, but still keeping it cool, you know. Whereas Cream always went more to that end of the spectrum, which was cool. So, you know, the track listing, the DJs, the artwork with the Cream was always just that little bit more out of reach than, let's say, Ministry of Sound, which might have been a little bit more pop chart, like, you know, Boy George, Pete Tong DJing on it, you know, whereas Cream would be Dave Seaman and Sasha or whoever. So that alone sort of says a lot. You know, you've got Radio One and pop star DJs, and then the track listing again. You know, so they were sort of going for that end, and it worked. I mean, they did it, but I would always try to rein it in with the design and bring it back to a place where I felt it was more aspirational.
It's getting to sort of round up now. You left Miniature Sound,
Mm.
and then you did a brief stint for Warner Music Group, as far as I understand. And
Bit of
yeah,
freelance,
yeah,
really. Yeah.
and then you co-founded a luxury lingerie brand called Made by Niki with your wife, as you mentioned. This feels quite an offshoot from what you were doing at Ministry of Sound. What caused the shift?
Wife, partner, you know, I'm married to her now. We've got 2 kids. We live in Cheshire. It's lovely, much, much quieter life, which I must admit suits me way better now. I've done a long, long stint of craziness in London, 90s, you know, music industry stuff. But when we met, we both worked at Ministry of Sound, and we were not rivals, but she worked in marketing, I was design. Does tend to get a little bit of friction between those 2 worlds, you know, marketing and design. "Oh, make the logo bigger." No, you know, that's pretty much the conversation quite a lot of the time. Um, and so, uh, I left Ministry of Sound. Things soured towards the end there. Politics, not the work. It was just politics and bullshit, if I'm honest. But unfortunately, didn't end massively happy for me there in the end. And so I needed a break. I think that it wasn't quite burnout, but I think when I look back, it was pretty close. I think that I was just partying very hard, enjoying that a lot, but I just wasn't really focused on what to do next. I'd been so heads down busy with Ministry of Sound. I was just like, okay, I had saved up a bit of money, was living a good life, and so me and my girlfriend, as she was then, now my wife, went traveling for a year and just quit London. Just that was it. I mean, now I look back, it was like such a massive thing to do. I pretty much left everything. We never went back to London permanently after that. And when we did come back, my wife decided to set up a business, and that business was fashion lingerie business. Neither of us had any experience in that world, but she wanted to go down this road. I was unsure which direction to take at the time, not sure really. And then she said, "Well, if you don't work with me, I'm going to have to find somebody else to help because it's getting busy." So I started doing that, and that was the next several years. It was a strange. I mean, do I regret it? Part of me does. I had some experiences that were great. I learned a lot about running a business. I learned a lot about things that weren't to do with graphic design. I didn't do a tremendous about graphic design during that period, other than I only did the stuff we did. That was always in a rush and with no money. I mean, it was a small business. We had every hope of selling it for, agent provocateur type money, but it just wasn't to be. It was terrible financial times going on everywhere, and we were, maybe a little bit late to the party, I think. So I don't. I do have regrets about the decisions to stick with it as long as we did. I think that I think if we'd have bailed a bit sooner, I probably would have been able to have sort of slotted back in perhaps to the design world that I had before. But I think a lot of years had passed, and a lot of the world of design had certainly moved on, and it certainly has since. I mean, massively. So yeah, I mean that path. But I still, the work we did with photographers and the art direction I was doing, and the little design work I did, I'm very proud of.
Do you regret leaving ministry?
I don't regret leaving ministry at all. No, I wish it had been on better terms, and I wish it had been kept open as a relationship. As in, maybe I could have been consulting with them or something, but it was just left with a slightly bitter taste. And um, I, like I say, took a break and moved on. And the people that were sort of working with me, some of the designers I was, because at one point there was 10 of us there, and I was in charge of it. One or two of those guys kind of took up the mantle, really, and I think, yeah, they still work with one or two of those guys today. But no, I mean, would I want to work with them again if they wanted to work with me? Yeah,
Maybe this is getting feelers out for you. Who's to say? I don't know.
I hope so. I mean, that's the thing. I've had a little bit of a sabbatical of sorts. I think since the Made by Niki thing came to an end, it was financially very, very hard. We had to make some big adjustments. We had two young children. Life, you soon realize, is about more than just graphic design. And I haven't been full-time graphic designing for a while now. I've been a dad. We moved to Cheshire. I had a lot of business and sort of financial things to sort out, to do with closing down a business, which was a tough time. My wife, meanwhile, has gone on to have a very successful career in marketing, and she's the reason we moved to where we moved is because she worked at Bentley Motors, as in the luxury car brand, and she's now working at a company called The Drum, which I'm sure some people would have heard of. It's a marketing network. She's the head of The Drum network. So I've just been really focusing on our two young children and trying to keep life on a steady keel. But I do miss graphic design. I do want to do it, keep doing it. If people want to find me, I'm on Instagram. As I said, I don't have a website because I was going to. I was, and I'm glad, and I kept saying, I don't know though. Instagram's doing it for me. I like the back and forth of communication. I like being able to post an ad. It just, why would I need to spend all that time and effort and money on a website? And I think some people still think that they're important, but I personally don't see the point. I think they're becoming less and less important. I think that, I mean, and I grew up when I was intro, going back to intro for a moment, websites were just becoming a thing. I mean, they literally were just becoming a thing. And the stuff people were doing is hilarious if you look back on it. I'm sure if you could find them, they were just pages with just stuff happening. You just were passive. You just would watch a thing happen on the screen, and it would be like, oh, what do I do now? And you got to follow that dot, or oh look, there's a spinny thing in the corner. I mean, there was nothing happening. It was just this sort of visual feast, but with nothing going in the other direction. But now, of course, it's getting to a point now where people are really starting to realize what we can do with it and what it's there for. And I think that social media, or at least the development of that, I think as a communication tool, because that's obviously what we're in the business of. To me, that's why would I want to create a website when I've got an Instagram account which is about communication and about getting visual imagery across? I mean, it does it for me. So yeah, that's where I suppose I am today. I'm putting a few ads out, crate digging, literally, physically, and technically, and digitally, to find an awful lot of work that I couldn't access on my old hard drives because I just couldn't open the files anymore, or physical copies that had been damaged through one thing or another over the years. And so I've been trawling eBay and finding things that I'd forgotten all about. And I was like, remarkable that, that 10-year period was so prolific. So prolific that I'm still finding things I could post. I've got another 5 or 6, 10 things coming in the post. Some stuff from America, some from, because we used to do stuff in the international releases as well. And so I'm quite enjoying that. And that's how this podcast came about with you. You got in touch, and that's the way I've just picked up a couple of little design jobs that are coming forward as well, which small they may be, but still great opportunity just to start flexing those muscles again.
I mentioned Manchester Met. Would you ever go into lecturing at all?
Not sure. I mean, I don't feel like I'm in a position to teach. I don't, funnily enough, my older brother, is a PhD head of design course himself. He went down the education road several years ago, and he's very successful in that world now. And he works down in and he's going to hate me if he hears this because I can't remember which bloody university he's at now. He was at Newport, and I think he might still be, but he's been really full on in that world for a while. I'm catching up with him soon, but I just think that I might come across as a bit old school, which maybe there's some merit in that, because when I went and heard Soul Bass, and I'm not putting myself in their territory at all, because they're sort of gods really in the design world. But when I went to see them, they were the old school. They were the craftsmen, and it was really, really left an impression. So the only reason I would be perhaps going back into the education world would be just to impart some of my experience or some of the stories, because things just keep popping up in my memory, all the time about stuff, and that's why it's fun doing the Instagram thing. No, as far as any kind of permanent teaching roles, I just don't think I'm well suited to it.
Again, just kind of finishing off, this is kind of the last question. I will ask if you got anything to plug, but you did plug your Instagram. But if you want to plug anything else, that's fine.
I'll keep plugging it
you
too.
keep honestly keep go for it. But lastly, if you could go back in time, it's quite a big question, but if you could go back in time to when you first got started and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
Don't take it. I suppose one is, don't take it for granted when things are going well, and I'm not sure, because it's not like I've really got any regrets. It's I mean, sure, I could have ended up running an agency and because actually a lot of the guys that work with me that I employed run their own agencies now. Very, very good careers, whereas mine's gone a little bit woohoo, like that. And I don't mind really. I mean, there was certainly a period a few years ago where I wasn't bitter, but I was very regretful of perhaps, oh shit, Ministry of Sound, everybody was like, wow, you're the guy that did that. And then I sort of vanished a bit and then came back doing a lingerie brand. So that was a curveball, but it's my choice. I did it. So I don't really have any regrets. And if anything, I think it paints a story, it makes life interesting. So I suppose that really is a way I've often operated, going back all the way to the t-shirt design that I did as a student, that, and even getting my first job, it all just kind of happened fairly naturally. I went, okay, that sounds cool. I'm going to do that. There was no master plan. It still isn't. And so I suppose if anything, yeah. Would there be any advice? No, I can't think of anything else.
That's fine. That's fine. I think there's, in terms of, you mentioned kind of just taking things as they come at you. Would that be something
Yeah,
that?
I suppose that doesn't sound massively proactive, does it, and all that? But I certainly was one for taking opportunities when they came my way. I certainly was not ignorant to a good opportunity, but I was also pretty good at networking. I think that was one of the things. I just happened to be somehow or another always in the right place at the right time for a long period of time there, and there's something to be said from that. I think when you're a student, it may be harder these days with the way the world is, but networking, physically being out there, meeting people and not making a nuisance of yourself, just realizing that, the importance of that.
Yeah, and then lastly, where can people find yourself online?
Instagram.
Instagram. Do you want to plug
Parker
that?
19,
What's the username again?
Scott Parker 1970.
There we go. Spelled exactly like the Fulham manager, I think, or ex-Fulham manager,
Yeah,
because that's
football.
all that came up when I googled you.
It's the only thing every couriers come to the door and they're like, the footballer. Yeah, that's me. Yeah, that's me.
Hiya, how you doing? Hope you enjoyed that. It'd been a while since I'd done one. I'm looking at the audio waveform now, and it keeps going really big, so I don't know, because I normally have my microphone on a stand, and I'll talk into it, and I haven't got a pop filter even now because I've moved house and things like that. So I don't know if the audio is crap or not. We'll see. I think I've got it at a good distance at the moment, but every now and again I'll go a bit closer. Oh, never mind. I don't know. It should be good. I'll stop rambling. Thank you for listening. If you want to follow me online, I'm Pirated Radio. I'm Pirated Material. Not Pirated Radio. That's the podcast. I am Pirated Material. Everywhere you want to find me. My website is piratedmaterial.co.uk. Give me money to design things, please. That would be nice. And yeah, I shall see you whenever I see you. Not see you, talk to you. Not even talk. You're not responding, are you? Talk at you. I'll talk at you soon. Ta ta.